Hi there, I'm Marigold. On my birthday, my in-laws invited me to a fancy dinner, only to leave me sitting alone in a decorated room with divorce papers and a note calling me useless. That was just the beginning. They faked my fertility records, erased me from our assets, even tried to barter my kidney like a deal. How do you survive when your own family turns you into a transaction? I don't know why I believed her. Meredith never called unless it was to correct, criticize, or manipulate. And yet, when her name lit up my phone that Thursday morning with a soft, almost sweet invitation, "Dinner, just you and us. Your birthday deserves to feel special." I let myself believe. Not in her, maybe, but in the possibility of change. It was a dangerous thing, hope dressed up as civility. I spent nearly an hour choosing my dress. Not because I wanted to impress them. I stopped trying a long time ago, but because I needed something to make me feel real. Grounded. The blue silk one Stuart never noticed. The one I wore on our 5th anniversary when he spent half the night whispering into his phone. I stared at myself in the mirror and whispered, maybe this year will be different. The restaurant was one of those places you only go to when someone else is paying. A name brand soaked in marble. Menus with no prices. Waiters who spoke softly but judged loudly. "Right this way, ma'am," the host said, guiding me past velvet drapes into a private room. Candlelight flickered across a long table set for 10, but there was no one there, just 10 chairs and one envelope. I stood frozen, scanning the room as if I'd walked into the wrong scene, like someone would pop out and yell surprise. But there was no surprise. Only silence so dense I could hear the hum of the air vents. My hand trembled as I opened the envelope. Inside, legal papers. Divorce. Already signed. Neat signatures. My name absent, and beneath them, a handwritten note. Defective, useless. You were never one of us. Meredith. I don't know how long I stood there. The room felt colder by the second. A chill settled into my ribs, making it hard to breathe. I wanted to scream, to tear the linens, to break every glass. But all I could do was stare at that table, laid out as if they'd celebrated something, without me. It wasn't just abandonment. It was humiliation choreographed to the second. The waiter brought water. "Is everything all right, ma'am?" I smiled like a good wife. "Could I speak to the manager? I may have dropped something earlier, a bracelet." It wasn't a lie. I had dropped something, my last ounce of trust. The manager was obliging. Took me to the security booth without question. "We do this all the time for guests," he said. "Lost jewelry, phones, you name it." The screen blinked to life. There they were, all of them. Stuart, Meredith, Celeste, even Harlan, the one who once said I was the only decent person to marry into the Blanchards. They laughed, clinked glasses. Meredith raised hers and said, "To a clean break." Stuart smirked. Celeste took a selfie. Then, like a pack of well-dressed predators, they stood and left. The last thing captured. A waiter adjusting my place setting, lighting the candle, smoothing the linen napkin. They timed it perfectly. I said thank you, left the office, and walked back into the now emptied room. Still no tears. Not yet. I sat down and picked up the wine list. "I'll have the Chateau Margaux and the tomahawk steak," I told the waiter. "He'll be covering it." I handed over Stuart's black card without blinking. Each bite was methodical, each sip a refusal to crumble. At some point between the main course and dessert, I looked into the champagne glass and saw not a broken woman, but a storm building behind her eyes. This wasn't the end of my story. Not even close. Morning light slipped through the blinds like it didn't know what had happened the night before. I did. I hadn't slept. Not really. I lay in bed fully clothed, my makeup smeared on the pillow, the room dense with a silence that didn't soothe. It suffocated. Stuart's side of the bed was untouched. Not a wrinkle on the sheets. Not even the faintest trace of his scent. He hadn't come home. Not that I expected him to, but something about the empty space next to me made it final. I sat up slowly, the soreness in my back a dull echo of the emotional weight I was still carrying. It wasn't over. My body knew before my mind did. When I turned on my phone, the first thing that flashed was a notification from Lawdesk Pro, our shared legal app. New document uploaded, Stuart Blanchard. Cold slid down my spine like an ice cube on glass. I opened the file without breathing. It was the same divorce document I'd found at the restaurant. Only this version was time-stamped. 2 weeks ago. 2 weeks. He'd signed away our marriage days before Meredith texted me that invitation. They knew. They'd planned it. Coordinated it like a play. The dinner, the candles, the empty chairs. It wasn't just betrayal, it was choreography. I read on. A clause about property reassignment. Every asset under his name now secured. Joint accounts severed. My name erased from our home deed. Another clause hinted at confidentiality. Mutual discretion to protect reputational interests. A warning dressed as legal language. My head throbbed. I scrolled faster, then stopped. A footnote. Obscure, but deliberate. All financial redirections pre-approved by Meredith Blanchard, acting counsel. Her fingerprints were all over this. Somewhere between nausea and rage, I remembered something. The bill. The restaurant had charged it to Stuart's card. I hadn't looked at it yet. I dialed the place, pretending to be cordial, controlled. Hi, this is Marigold Blanchard. I was there last night for a private dinner. Room 8. I need an itemized receipt for tax purposes. Of course, Mrs. Blanchard, the woman on the other end chirped. We'll email it to the address on file. Seconds later, it pinged into my inbox. The bill listed every dish, every wine, but what arrested me was a small internal note at the top. 1-seat humiliation setup, room 8, 7 p.m. I stared at it. Words blurred, then snapped into painful focus. It wasn't just a joke. It was a file name, like an event title, a conference booking, a reminder in someone's calendar. Humiliation was never incidental. It had a name, a budget, a goddamn timestamp. I pushed back from the table, breathing in short, sharp bursts. They think I'll vanish, I said out loud, my voice low, foreign, like it belonged to someone else, someone harder. I didn't cry. That version of me had stayed at the restaurant. Instead, I created a new folder on my laptop. Countermeasures private. Then I downloaded every document, every receipt, every thread of proof. I encrypted the folder, backed it up, twice. I deleted the emails from my inbox. But I didn't forget. For the first time in months, maybe years, I felt something shift in me. Not strength, not yet, but strategy. They'd made their move, now I would make mine. The Blanchard estate still smelled of lemon polish and curated roses. I hadn't stepped foot in that house since the dinner. I told myself I was showing up for appearances, to keep things from escalating too fast. But the truth was, I needed to see their faces. I needed to feel the weight of what they thought they were getting away with. The dining room shimmered under a chandelier too grand for anything but performance. Crystal glasses lined up like soldiers, every place setting perfect. Meredith sat at the head like she always did, poised in calculated elegance. Stuart was to her right, 2 seats down from mine. He didn't look at me once. Dessert arrived in porcelain ramekins, steam curling from the tops like they were proud of the sweetness inside. That's when Meredith dabbed her mouth with her napkin, set it aside, and turned her gaze to me with the venom of a cobra under silk. Have you taken a pregnancy test lately, dear? Forks froze mid-air. Stuart sipped his wine without a word. My throat went dry. I beg your pardon? She smiled, thin and polite. We're just all invested, you know, in your progress. It's been what, 12 rounds now? I felt my heart stutter. I looked to Stuart. Nothing. Not a twitch. Not a glance. I don't owe you or anyone here that kind of update, I said, calm but razor-edged. And if this is your version of concern, you can keep it. The silence that followed was more honest than any words that could have been spoken. I stood, left the dessert untouched. No one followed me out. That night, I drove to the fertility clinic. I asked for everything: charts, hormone logs, prescriptions. I told them I needed it for a second opinion. The nurse behind the counter hesitated. When she came back, she handed me a sealed envelope. I opened it before I left the building. There were notes I hadn't signed, orders I hadn't seen, protocols extended without cause, cycles that should have ended, hadn't. I went back inside. One nurse, Sarah, I think, followed me into a side hallway. He made special requests, she whispered. Said you two were aligned on everything. We didn't know. I'm sorry. Requests? Private donations, instructions to continue treatments, payment in full. He signed the authorizations. I walked out without another word. In the car, I sat holding the folder in my lap like it might catch fire. So that's what it had been. Not hope, not medical necessity. It was obedience, a lab-controlled extension of Stuart's illusion of effort. He had let me inject myself, cramp in pain, bleed out my dignity for months, because it made him look like a husband still trying. He knew there was no point. He knew. I didn't cry. That version of me was buried beneath layers of bruised skin and cooled rage. What rose instead was something clearer, leaner, strategic. I pressed the folder closed with both hands and drove home. When I got back to the apartment, I didn't even take my coat off. I went straight to my desk, opened my laptop. There was one name I hadn't deleted from my old press contacts, one person who owed me a favor. I composed the email in 10 minutes, attached scans of the clinic forms, altered treatment schedules, the flagged inconsistencies. I didn't sign it. I didn't need to. My finger hovered over the send button. You want war, Stuart? Click. The ping echoed in the dark. I was already awake, staring at the ceiling, heart heavy and wired. My phone vibrated again. I turned it over, expecting another headline about inflation or some unhinged political tweet. Instead, it was Stuart. I can't keep lying to her. I'm done pretending. She'll be fine. She always is. I blinked. My brain rejected it at first, the way you swat away a bug you haven't seen yet. Then, seconds later, wrong person. No apology, no backpedaling, just that. A simple admission that I was no longer worth the effort of deception. I didn't respond. I just lay there, letting the silence bloom into something uglier, something sharper. 6 years ago, I held his hand in the clinic as they prepped my arm for another hormone injection. We're in this together, he had whispered. I'd believed him, because I wanted to. By morning, I was fully dressed and halfway through a cold brew before I remembered the old iPad in the kitchen drawer, one he used to link to our joint banking apps before we both upgraded. I powered it on, fingers numb. He never changed his password. There it was. Monthly transfers to an unfamiliar leasing company. The name of the complex was tucked into the transaction memos, the Lanier Residences, a luxury development north of downtown. Quiet, expensive, new. I was already in the car before I could rationalize why. The place looked like a magazine ad. Ivy-covered walkways. A fountain that ran like it never noticed droughts. The security guard glanced up as I walked in like I belonged. I lingered in the lobby under the guise of checking mail directories. That's when I saw her. She couldn't have been more than 28. Sharp coat, ponytail, holding a reusable coffee cup and a visible baby bump. She passed me without recognition, but used a keycard to access the elevator. I asked the concierge if Stuart Langford was on the lease. I showed my ID. We're married, I said. I just need to confirm his unit number. He hesitated, then scanned something. He's listed as a co-tenant. Lease started 14 months ago. 14. That was before our last IVF cycle, before the needles, before the bruises on my hips, before I collapsed in our bathroom after a failed transfer, and he told me, we just need to believe harder. I walked out without thanking anyone. I didn't scream. I didn't even flinch. I drove to a bluff overlooking the city and parked. The skyline was clean and cruel against the morning light. It was never about my fertility. It was about control, optics. Stuart needed me to keep failing so he could keep posing, the supportive husband, the grieving father-to-be, and all the while he had another life, already in bloom. But now I had data, paper trails, proof. I called a lawyer, not the one from the firm Stuart once hired to handle their estate. No, I needed someone discreet, someone brutal. Her assistant scheduled me for Tuesday morning. Back home, I sat at my desk and opened the laptop. I compiled everything, screenshots of the transactions, the leasing record, the text. This time, I wasn't writing to the press. I was writing to the one person who would weaponize this better than I ever could, my divorce attorney. Subject line, initial evidence confidential. I clicked send. I was reviewing tax statements when the first ripple hit. The numbers didn't match. Not just a missed zero or a form filed late, something deeper, older. My name was missing from the real estate trust. I blinked, checked again. The property I co-invested in when Stuart and I were barely affording takeout sushi was now listed solely under his name. I called our old financial advisor Bradley, a man who once toasted our bright future with cheap champagne. His voice cracked the moment he realized it was me. Marigold? I didn't know you weren't aware. Didn't know what, Brad? A silence long enough to count betrayal in. You were removed from the family trust and joint assets last November. Stuart said it was temporary, just for protection. Something about financial vulnerability tied to IVF outcomes. IVF outcomes. As if my body's failure was a financial liability. My name, gone from our stocks, scrubbed from our investment accounts like I'd never contributed a dime. The spreadsheet stared back at me, silent and sterile. Cold betrayal hidden in formulas. Later that night, I went into Stuart's home office. I hadn't touched his desk in months, but something in me itched. A drawer stuck halfway. I pulled it harder. An old USB drive rattled against the wood. It wasn't labeled, just brushed aluminum and a strip of green tape. I plugged it into my laptop and opened the first folder. Legal documents, email chains. One stood out. Plan B, legal separation if IVF fails. My heart stopped. I clicked. There it was, Meredith's language all over it. The clipped phrasing, the corporate tone, the cruelty wrapped in professionalism. Phase out legal and financial involvement. Transition social circles away from subject. Preset narrative in case of public inquiry. There was a timeline, a strategy, a goddamn press release. Stuart and Marigold remain committed friends and business allies, it read. The family continues to support Stuart's healing and growth after an emotionally taxing journey. Support Stuart? I didn't know whether to laugh or vomit. There was even a placeholder for the new wife. Miss G ___ will remain a private citizen, focused on health and the future of the family legacy. I stared at the screen, mouth dry. They hadn't betrayed me on impulse. This was their architecture. A blueprint built around my fertility, my failure, as if I were a faulty investment to be quietly written off. I printed everything, scanned and backed up 3 times. Then I called my lawyer. I'm updating my will, I said, also attaching a press draft of my own. She didn't ask why. She just said, understood. I ended the call, attached the files, and added a note beneath my signature. For use only if provoked further. I closed the laptop slowly. My hand didn't tremble. I picked up the phone and called Stuart. Hey, I said. We need to talk. He paused. Now's not. You'll make time, I said. We meet Friday, noon. A beat. Then, okay. I walked to my closet. Behind my blazers, tucked behind a suit I hadn't worn since court, was the folder I never thought I'd use. The label read, Contingency Mine. I slipped it into my leather bag, right next to my state bar card. You want war? I whispered to myself. I studied law for this. I woke to my phone vibrating nonstop on the nightstand. 17 missed calls, 14 voicemails, too many unread texts to count. My inbox looked like a war zone. At first, I assumed something had happened to Stuart, until I opened the first email. Subject, immediate pause on contractual work. It was from my largest client, the health nonprofit I'd fought to represent for years. They were suspending our agreement, pending clarification of recent allegations. No further explanation. My stomach turned to ash. A second email, then a third, and then the courthouse whispers began. She lost it during IVF. Someone said she broke down in front of a judge. Unstable. I caught the tail end of a junior associate's hushed comment in the hallway. He clammed up when I passed, but I saw it in his eyes. Pity. By noon, one of my interns sent me a screenshot, an anonymous Reddit thread titled, When High-Powered Lawyers Crack. They'd posted excerpts of confidential documents, twisted claims, just enough truth to make the lies stick. There was only one person with that access, Celeste. She always wore envy like a silk scarf, light and effortless, but meant to choke. I had once, stupidly, tried to connect with her during one of our endless Blanchard family dinners. We'd shared a glass of wine. I'd confessed feeling overwhelmed by hormones, legal pressures, marital tension. She'd nodded, played warm. She was recording me, I should have known. The podcast dropped at 4 p.m. Eastern. Whispers in the family. Subheading. The ones who smile the widest fall the hardest. The audio was cut to sound unhinged. Me saying, "I don't even know who I am anymore," was followed by ominous music. She layered in her narration, all sugar-dipped sympathy. "I just think we need to ask, are some women built for pressure?" She let my silence hang after that question like a verdict. The episode had over 300,000 plays in 4 hours. I sat in my parked car, hands shaking around the steering wheel. My ears rang. My throat itched. This wasn't just betrayal. It was character execution. Celeste hadn't just tried to hurt me. She wanted me erased, discredited, ruined. I recorded the whole podcast, took screenshots of every vile comment, every retweet. I added them to a folder on my desktop labeled Litigation Celeste Blanchard. Then I called Julia, my PR contact. "It's time," I said. Her voice was sharp with purpose. What tone? Controlled, calm, but no mercy. We drafted a statement by midnight. The wording surgical, precise. My legal team filed a defamation suit the next morning. And then, I called my friend Camila, a civil rights influencer with 3 million followers. "You want to talk about women weaponized against women?" I asked. "I'll make room on my live Friday," she said without missing a beat. It wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about dignity. I may have been shamed, but I wasn't silenced. By noon, Celeste received a legal notice in her inbox. I watched the timestamp when she opened it. "Download confirmed," my lawyer said, then hung up. I stared at the screen, whispered under my breath, "You picked the wrong lawyer to frame." I turned toward the soft glow of my ring light, pressed record, and looked into the lens. This time I held the mic, and every word would be mine. The call came just after sunrise. I almost didn't pick up. The number was unfamiliar, and my mind was already full of everything I had to prepare for court that day. But something about the area code, it pulled at me. "Marigold?" a woman asked, cautious. "I used to work at Pacific Women's Fertility. I'm no longer with them. And I think you deserve the truth." I sat down. She didn't rush. Her voice stayed measured, kind but steady. She told me Stuart had been diagnosed with infertility years before we began our first round of IVF. That he knew, that Meredith knew, that the clinic knew. I didn't respond right away. I just pressed the phone tighter to my ear, like proximity might change what I was hearing. All those cycles, all those drugs, the swollen bruises on my thighs, the mood swings that scared even me. The nights I cried on the bathroom floor, blaming my own broken body, while Stuart stroked my hair and whispered, "We'll get through this together." He let me believe it was me. They all did. When I finally hung up, I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I stared at my hands for a long time, remembering how many times they'd trembled after another failed round. Then my inbox dinged, from Harlan. Subject Blanchard files. I hesitated. He'd always kept his distance, the silent observer in their circus. But now, he was stepping in. I opened the folder. Emails, dozens, between Meredith and their longtime physician, spanning back over 5 years. The first one I read. "Ensure no documentation explicitly states Stuart's diagnosis. We must avoid any records being traceable to him. If necessary, redirect attention to her side. She's emotionally vulnerable. Use it." Another. "If she starts asking questions, initiate Plan B. Legal distance. Push the instability narrative." The more I read, the more I felt my bones harden under my skin. This wasn't betrayal. This was structural sabotage. They orchestrated a slow emotional decay and dressed it up as love. And I thanked them for it. I didn't think. I moved. I contacted my tech team, booked a stream slot. Not a rant, not a meltdown, a disclosure. Everything I had, emails, files, audio clips, timeline documents, I prepared it for upload. I rehearsed only once. When I went live, I didn't wear makeup. I didn't bother to soften anything. "My name is Marigold Blanchard," I began, "but I won't be for much longer." I laid it out like a legal deposition, cold, factual, with names, with proof. The woman you see smiling in those photos, she was bleeding behind the eyes, not because her body failed her, but because the people closest to her made her believe it had. The stream hit over 400K in 3 hours. The comments poured in, outrage, disbelief, solidarity. My DMs flooded with women who'd gone through the same. A producer messaged asking if I'd be open to telling the story on national television. Then, just before midnight, another email. No subject, no greeting, just one line. "You've made a grave mistake." I stared at it. No name, but I knew the venom behind those words. Meredith's threats always came like whispers through velvet gloves. I smiled. I typed one reply. "Not as grave as yours." That night, I turned on the news. Meredith's photo flashed on screen beside a headline that would shake the Blanchard name from its pedestal. Lawyer exposes high society IVF scandal. Blanchard family at center. This wasn't just justice. This was the beginning of their end. The call came while I was brushing my teeth, half listening to a podcast. I almost let it go to voicemail, but something about the silence that followed the ringtone made me answer. "Is this Marigold Blanchard?" the voice asked. It was Harlan's doctor. His tone was clinical, steady, just enough to hold back the urgency underneath. Harlan's kidneys were failing, fast. He was slipping into stage 5. There were no available family donors. None except me. I didn't speak. I didn't even breathe. I stared at the bathroom mirror, toothbrush still in hand, suds drying at the corners of my lips. My reflection didn't look surprised. It looked hollow. I told the doctor I needed time. The second I hung up, every image flooded back. Harlan laughing behind my back in the restaurant, looking away when Meredith humiliated me. Not cruel, just spineless. And yet, somehow, he was the only one who never tried to destroy me with his hands. Only his silence. The guilt hit fast, but my rage fought back harder. My chest felt like it was splintering. That night, it was Meredith who showed up on my doorstep, unannounced. Her mouth pulled into a tight, practiced smile that didn't reach her eyes. "I know you've heard," she said. I didn't invite her in, but she walked in anyway, like the house still belonged to her son. She sat, placed a velvet box on my table, and opened it without ceremony. Inside was the Blanchard family ring, thick gold, heavy with engraved initials. It was supposed to be passed down to the wife of the heir. Me. "This is yours," she said, voice soft. "If you agree to save him." There was no pleas, no tears, just the transaction. I looked at the ring, then at her. Even now she couldn't beg, couldn't lower herself. Her currency was always control, even at the edge of death. She thought she was offering legacy. What I saw was rot wrapped in velvet. I closed the box slowly and slid it back toward her. Was there anything else? She stood up without another word. That night I didn't sleep. I didn't even try. I sat at the kitchen table with the transplant consent form in front of me and Meredith's velvet box untouched in the corner. I wrote a letter to Harlan, not for him to read now, but one to be kept in his file, should he ever wonder why I did it. This gift is not forgiveness. It's freedom. I signed the form, folded the letter, went upstairs and laid out clothes for the morning. The surgery was successful. When I woke up, the hospital room was quiet. No flowers, no apologies, just my name on a wristband and a dull ache in my side that mirrored the deeper one still lodged in my chest. Harlan survived. Meredith didn't visit, didn't thank me, but I saw her in the hallway, jaw tight, posture rigid, trying to keep dignity stitched into the edges of her carefully curated life. As I left the hospital days later, a reporter caught her on the sidewalk. "Did you really try to barter with your daughter-in-law's body?" she asked, microphone thrust forward like a weapon. Meredith froze. Cameras clicked. She pushed past them, face dark with rage. Someone had leaked the footage of the ring offer. I didn't comment. I didn't need to. I watched from home, one hand wrapped around a mug of tea, the other resting against the thin scar on my side. The screen glowed, Meredith's face now a symbol of scandal. I chose not to speak, for now. The silence wasn't surrender. It was power, patience. Let the world judge. I had already made my choice. The hospital lights hummed gently above me. I blinked into their stillness, body heavier than I remembered, soul lighter than I'd thought possible. The surgery was done. The scar on my abdomen throbbed in rhythm with my pulse, but beneath it, peace stretched quietly, like breath after drowning. A nurse tiptoed in, her shoes whispering against tile. "It's working," she said, soft and warm. "Harlan's doing well. His body's accepting the kidney." I nodded. No thanks expected, no visitors requested. I didn't ask to see anyone from the Blanchards. I didn't want flowers or cards or a lukewarm apology hastily glued together for optics. What I needed, I had. Clarity. I stared at the ceiling. The cracks above me weren't flaws. They were proof the surface had survived pressure. Much like me. I hadn't done it for them. I'd done it because I needed to know I was still capable of choosing compassion without surrendering my spine. The internet, however, didn't rest. A leak, audio of Meredith offering the ring, hit social media like wildfire and drought. She tried to bribe her daughter-in-law with jewelry for a kidney, a morning anchor hissed. What kind of family does that? Comments swirled, disgust, outrage, a few bitter jokes. Meredith was forced to resign from 2 charity boards, her name stripped from gala invitations she once demanded top billing on. Stuart's bar license was flagged for review, the investigation quiet but damning. Neither said a word to me, no texts, no statements, just public silence. I didn't respond either. And that said more than any statement ever could. Years ago, I'd represented women too scared to testify. They had let me speak for them. Now I understood what it meant to sit inside silence, not out of fear, but strength. Because sometimes, not answering is the loudest reply. When I was finally cleared to go home, I didn't return to the house I used to share with Stuart. I went to the office. Mine. Small, but mine. The brass nameplate read, Law Office of Marigold Langley. I dropped the Blanchard name months ago. Inside, there was barely enough room for a desk, a couch, and hope. But it was enough. My first client came in the next week. Early 30s. Abandoned mid-IVF by a man who swore he loved her. As she cried softly into a tissue, I didn't interrupt. I didn't rush. I knew that pain too well, and I knew how to fight back from it. That night, Elias brought soup. He didn't ask to stay, just left it on the porch with a quiet text. For strength. He didn't need to fix me. He never tried. Sometimes he sat in the corner of my office after hours, reading while I wrote case notes. Other times, he just listened. And slowly, my body stopped flinching when someone was near. We didn't need to define what we were yet. Some things deserved space to become. Before closing one evening, I wrote a letter. Not to anyone. Just to her. The girl who'd once thought her worth was tied to a wedding ring and a positive pregnancy test. You were never broken. Just unfinished. I folded it and slipped it into the drawer next to my bar card. Outside the window, the sun angled low, warm through glass. I pressed my hand gently over my scar. Not a wound anymore, a mark, a choice. Then the delivery came. No return address. Inside, the ring. The same one Meredith had once tried to use as leverage. No note, just the thing itself. I turned it in my hand, watched the light catch in its edges, and tucked it away in my safe. Not to wear, to remember. Some roots grow stronger far from the soil that buried them. They thought breaking me would be easy. That silence meant surrender. But what they didn't understand is that silence can be a decision, a powerful one. I didn't fight them with rage. I fought with facts, with law, and with a soul that refused to disappear quietly. To anyone watching who's ever been dismissed, gaslit, or told you're too emotional or not enough, you are not alone. What happened to me could happen to anyone. When love turns into control, when family becomes manipulation wrapped in manners. But your story doesn't end where they expect it to. It begins the moment you choose yourself. I want you to remember, boundaries are not betrayal. Protecting your peace is not selfish. And walking away from what destroys you is not weakness, it's wisdom. Now let me ask you, have you ever been in a situation where doing the right thing meant letting go of everything familiar? What did you choose? And if you could speak to your younger self, what would you say? If this story moved you or reminded you of someone, drop a comment below, write 1 if it hit home, or tell me where you're watching from. I want to hear your voice, and if this isn't your kind of story, tell me why. I'm here to grow just like you. If you haven't already, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss the next chapter in Stories That Matter. Because healing is never quiet, and neither are we. See you in the next story.